AI requires a lot of compute power, and the cost for your AI workloads can spiral. That is, unless you're running on OCI, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. This was the cloud built for AI, a blazing fast, enterprise-grade platform for your infrastructure, database apps, and all of your AI workloads.
Right now, Oracle can cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. Minimum financial commitment and other terms apply. Offer ends March 31st. See if you qualify at oracle.com/WSJTech. Oracle.com/WSJTech.
Good afternoon. Let's get right down to business here. We are doing it live, doing more at 4 weekday afternoons right here in 790 KBC, streaming live at KBC.com, and, of course, the on-demand Mottek On Money podcast at KBC.com, Apple, iTunes, YouTube, all of your favorite podcast platforms. Mixed starts to the new week on Wall Street, and, yes, nervous times on Main Street, with President Trump announcing sweeping tariffs on imports from Canada and Mexico will go forward when a month-long delay on their implementation expires next week. Remains to be seen what impact that will have. The tariffs are going forward on time and on schedule, the president announced when he was asked if the postponed tariffs would soon go back into effect. In reaction, we saw the NASDAQ take a tumble today with tech names getting hit as the AI growth story remains a bit concerning. We did see some of the AI names, including the big one, NVIDIA, down more than $4 today at 130 and change. It was also a rough day for the cryptos as the NASDAQ took a hit. We saw Bitcoin take a tumble back below 92,000 here at the moment. At last check, the NASDAQ, the casualty of the day, down 237 points at 19,287. The S&P 500 down 30 points at 5,983, coming off of last week's record high. And the Dow moving higher by 33 points at 43,461. Apple among the winners today, up $1.55 at 247.10. The NASDAQ primarily dragged lower by companies including Palantir, Constellation Energy, and PDD. It was the index's second consecutive daily drop of more than 1%. Nike among the top performers today after an analyst gave it an upgrade, noting that its chief executive was positioning the company for growth. We did watch the price of gold tick higher again today, near a record high, up nearly $3 right now at $2,965 and change. Silver also on the rise right now, up 3 cents at $32.63 an ounce. Berkshire Hathaway shares jumping today and seeing their best day in quite some time. Looks like Warren Buffett's company it turns out, has a record cash pile, as we learned over the weekend, and that big shareholder letter he released over the weekend. Warren Buffett's holdings of cash and treasury bills totaling more than $321 billion at the end of last year. That's a pretty thick wallet. But Buffett's investment stance hasn't changed. According to the letter, Berkshire, it said, will never prefer ownership of cash equivalent assets over the ownership of good businesses, whether controlled only or partially owned, he told the shareholders in the letter. As I mentioned, a rough day for cryptos. The company behind OKX, one of the world's largest cryptocurrency exchanges, admitting today that it illegally served U.S. customers and agreed to pay a penalty of more than $500 million to resolve a federal investigation. Tensions rising in the Middle East again, with Israel moving tanks into the West Bank for the first time since 2002, and an Iranian general making new threats against Israel. We'll discuss the very latest developments on the Middle East this afternoon with Middle East expert Dan RAVIV, longtime network news correspondent and Middle East expert and author, will be joining me live later this hour. The massive rebuilding effort continues here in Southern California following last month's firestorms. A big commercial real estate project in West Hollywood goes back to the drawing board. We'll discuss what's happening on the commercial real estate scene with Jerry Sullivan at The Real Deal, who'll be joining me live later this hour. But first, joining me live now on Your Money, the markets, the economy, and the whole works. Joining us live, top-ranked money manager Ken WINANS, President and Chief Investment Officer at WINANS Investments, which you can find at winansinvestments.com. Ken WINANS is also a market historian, author of numerous books, including his latest, Investment Assets 3, Creating Wealth Using Historical Trends. Ken WINANS is also a Forbes magazine contributor, so be sure to check out his latest articles. He has his crypto credentials, too, and most importantly, he is host of Winning with WINANS, which is heard every Monday night at 6 p.m. on your favorite station right here, 790 KABC, streaming live worldwide at KBC.com, and also on demand, Winning with WINANS podcast at KBC.com. Ken WINANS, good afternoon to you, sir.
Hello, Frank. And I know that, it's just sad that February has this not great reputation in the markets. A lot of times I have some people say, I'm not sure about the seasonality thing that you sometimes talk about. Well, for what it's worth, I'm looking right here, the data since 1970 to present. So that includes the, basically almost 3 full inflation cycles. The simple fact of the matter is, for the S&P 500, the average return for February through all that, 0.2%. So it's never a great month. And then when you throw on top of it, I think that it's certainly catching a lot of people by surprise. We did wrap up earnings season, and earnings wasn't bad by any stretch of the imagination. But what I think suddenly dawned on everybody is that what we were seeing for earnings didn't quite match the multiples, meaning the valuation of the stock price to those revenues and those bottom line numbers. And that's why you're seeing some of the contortions that we see in the market right now. But Frank, the other thing that's really kind of interesting is that here we are now, S&P is up 2% year to date, which, again, you're looking at that being pretty typical or pretty much an average rate of return. Dow up 2. But what's really beginning to catch my eye is that, lo and behold, the Bloomberg Commodity Index is up 10% year to date. So suddenly you've had this shift going back to physical assets. And I think maybe the situation that people should be thinking about today, it's not just gold and silver. The entire commodity complex is on the rise.
On there live with money manager Ken Winans, and a lot of attention focused on what Warren Buffett had to say over the weekend in his letter to shareholders. And he's holding a pile of cash these days. Give us your reaction to what he came out with over the weekend.
Well, it's interesting. Mr. Buffett's strategy, and by the way, somebody who I greatly admire from the standpoint he's been in our industry for a very, very long time. Obviously, he's been a legendary success story. But he raised same concerns about valuations, and he is not one to go after what's new and flavorful in the market. He stays with what's true to him and what his people and his staff understand. But I bet if you dug into that letter, you would see him saying something very similar about that inflation is not disappearing anytime soon. It's going to be around for a while. In fact, I was at a conference in Las Vegas last Friday. It was the Chartered Financial Analyst Western Society Conference. They had a lot of speakers there, and they all said the same thing. Inflation is going to continue to bob around between basically 3 and 5%. There's not much you can do about it. It takes a very long time to dry up the excess liquidity. So I believe we're all looking at the same thing, but obviously our job is to try to figure out a way to make money and to try to play this game well. Absolutely,
and follow everything that's happening, and a lot to follow these days. President Trump had the president of France at the White House today. Over the weekend, the German elections came in. The results came in almost instantly. California perhaps could learn from some of that here, by the way. And then, of course, the tariff comments he made also impacted the market. So what about the tariff part of the story here?
The interesting part about the whole tariff thing, and Frank, it is interesting that on both of our shows, when I do get any correspondence, it's people's feelings that tariffs are automatically inflationary. This is my take. Yes, it is out there. Yes, it can have a disruptive effect when you look at what happens, certainly when I mentioned in commodities. But one of the things that I am taking away from this is that we're trying to reset trade negotiations that President Trump feels are unfair. And as I look at them, although I'm by no means a treaty expert, when you just look at them on the front page, they don't look right. There's certainly many of our major trading partners have had major tariffs on us for a very long time, ranging from cars to wine. So, you have to take a look at that. But and I don't know if the audience knows, what happened in Germany over the weekend was literally a shift to the right, a shift to the new chancellor, Germany first. Instead of make America great again, it's make Germany great again. And that is causing some concerns for people in Europe because Germany is still the largest economy there. But yes, this shift is going on all over the place.
Very interesting. And one other thing that's getting a lot of attention now, I was at the supermarket over the weekend, and that sign was up there at the egg section. Only one carton per customer or family or whatever. And you mentioned commodities, and certainly I don't think we spent enough time talking about eggs, but some of the egg-producing names, the stocks, let's see, we had Cal-Maine and Vital Farms among them. Those are publicly traded egg stocks, and eggs because of the bird flu primarily. Obviously, have risen in price tremendously and have caused a lot of inflation at the grocery store. What about the egg names here?
I think every state, and because again, we have to think about California. Although we don't typically think about it, drive an hour north of Los Angeles, and you realize you're in agricultural country. You're in cattle country, rice country, soybean country, and if you go a little further north, you were in poultry and hog country. So here's the point. There is going to have to be some soul searching within California's political ranks on environmental concerns versus the agricultural business, because those products do affect what happens on the grocery store shelves in Southern California. So, Frank, you're 100% right. Now, the bird flu situation, they're still trying to get that under control, but we have the same situation happening in cattle right now, live and feeder, which are two parts of cattle in the complex that we know better as beef. Unfortunately, food prices are going to probably stay high for a decent part of the year. And, it's interesting when I just look, and there are going to be some of my names that I'm going to recommend tonight, but there is definitely this bend back towards inflation resistance or inflation beneficial type of investments. And whether it's utilities, insurance companies, or commodities, there's definitely money moving back in those directions.
All right, and I know you follow the bond market very closely, and we see the yield in the 10-year note is back down to 4.41%. That's the one that impacts the fixed-rate mortgage rates out there, and President Trump has made it a point to say that's the one that he's aiming to lower rates on and ultimately impact mortgage rates, and that seems to be having an effect at the moment. What do you see ahead there?
As long as the inflation numbers stay in the range that we are right now, we could just simply, and I think we all should get used to this, that the range for interest rates right now are probably going to stay where they're going to be at, Frank. And, and I know that a lot of people don't want to hear that, but let me put it into this perspective. What you do not want as an investor or a business person are interest rates that are being pogoed around like they were in the 1970s. Very hard to hedge, very hard to gauge what to do, very hard for banks to decide on who to lend money to and for how long. So you'd rather have some stability. We're going through that great readjustment after the election, and I know that maybe some people feel like maybe the honeymoon is over. That's not that at all. There's just a lot of moving pieces right now, tariffs being part of it, certainly the readjustment of what's going on in Washington, D.C. But I'll also throw this into the mix too. I think we're going to see a lot of shifting going around at state capitals on how and where money is going to be allocated for that. Because one thing that is loud and clear, that the states are, the party's over on them getting a lot of free money from the federal government. They're going to have to figure out how to make the ends meet within their own states, and that includes California.
On the air live with money manager Ken Winans, top-ranked money manager Ken Winans, the president and chief investment officer at Winans Investments, which you can find at winansinvestments.com. And Ken, we did see gold move higher today as these tariffs concerns fuel inflation worries, right? Gold up about $3 here now at $2,965 and change. Silver hovering above 32, pretty close to $33 here an ounce. And, of course, we also follow so-called digital gold, the cryptos, which took a hit in the face of all this. And as you've noted, the connection here between the NASDAQ and the crypto space. Give us your thoughts here on digital gold and analog gold here at this point.
Well, let me start with analog gold first. I actually think there is a bit of a relationship between that and the digital world. I think there's more and more people, with the fact that momentum has largely or clearly left the crypto space, especially in the big guys like certainly with Bitcoin, and then certainly with what the explosion in Ethereum on it falling apart. I see more money in the trading world moving back into gold, silver, and then there's some talks about platinum coming back to life. I mean, the simple fact of the matter is, if you look at the GLD, which is the gold ETF, it is up 12% year to date, 42% in the last 14 months. The trend is still very strong there. People are still going there. And as you brought up, Frank, it was up today. Much can be said the same about silver. But now let's go back into crypto because you brought it up. We're actually entering a very critical phase right now, around 90,000 on Bitcoin. Now, I'm a technician. I follow what's going on price action and on charting and on moving averages. In my article I wrote last year in Forbes about crypto, I mentioned that the 20-week moving average on Bitcoin is a very critical support point determining whether it's an uptrend or a downtrend. We're getting very, very close to that point right now. So I would expect there to be some buying right around here. But if it does not hold there, I hate to say it, but we're looking at Bitcoin possibly going back down to 80,000. So there's a lot going on. The other problem, too, is Ethereum. I talked to an expert over the weekend who was actually at this conference I was talking about earlier, and I did not know there was talk that Ethereum somehow changed its algorithmic format, and I was not aware of this. We have to be aware that these kind of little tweaks can really affect the value of anything in the crypto space, and we clearly saw what happened with Ethereum. So I think that, basically cryptos are going to stay range bound. You talked about the relationship with the NASDAQ. That is clearly alive and well on a quarterly basis, and I don't think the NASDAQ is going to be the lead index this year. I think it's going to be other groups. So I think anybody who's a crypto person, you just think nothing goes straight up forever, and you have to wait for these consolidations to play out.
It goes up and it goes down, but certainly it was got that big pop after President Trump came into office last month, hit a record high for Bitcoin, and then we've seen some wild gyrations since then. Right now, hovering below 92,000 for Bitcoin. And what are your thoughts about all these meme coins, these tokens that get a lot of attention and seem to be flashes in the pan?
You know what? I would just tell anybody looking at meme to not forget what happened with the non-fungible token craze that we had with art and music and all this other stuff 3 years ago. Frank, you and I both know that was the rave during that time. And of course, they blew up. I would say that meme is only for somebody who's a highly experienced trader and crypto expert. It is not for the typical person. And the other problem too is that we're not done yet with this conversion in the crypto space, meaning the stable coin. I think we're going to see a lot of initial coin offerings later this year after the regulations are really cemented with where this fits into the whole scheme in our financial system. I think people just let it play out before you rush to the party. Let things simply go up. And as you just said, nothing goes straight up. You will have your opportunities. But I personally think for most people, let's get the facts before you commit new money.
Fortunately, we'll have some more time tonight live in the 6 o'clock hour here in 790 KABC to continue our conversation. But for this audience, Ken Winans, let me ask you the big question here. Any specific places where you are putting money now and or taking it off the table?
Absolutely. I'm going to throw, I've been asked by some of the audience members to always include some ETFs. So, Frank, I think there's three spaces that I'm looking at it right now. They make a world of sense. First is financials. If you are somebody that wants to have money in the financial space, look at XLF. I don't think you can deny the movement going on in utilities. I'm looking at my research. Ironically, except for California utilities, everywhere else in the country, they seem to be going up. Look at XLU. And then in the commodity space, if you don't want to pick individual commodities, look at DBC. But on individual stock basis, take a good hard look at these insurance stocks. These are companies that should be way down based on the disasters that hit California and the East Coast. And I'm looking at companies like Progressive, which certainly has policies outstanding. The stock is up 14% on the year. It's up 2% today. I think you need to be in the insurance space. So I'll add Progressive, AJ Gallagher, and Marsh McClellan to my list of insurance plays. Energy space, look at Williams. I still love that stock for anybody looking for energy.
Ken, I wish we had more time, but luckily we do. Tonight at 6 o'clock on Winning with Winans, we will continue the conversation on your show that you'll be hosting this evening at 6 o'clock. Ken Winans, President and Chief Investment Officer at Winans Investments, which you can find at winansinvestments.com. Ken Winans, also a market historian and author of numerous books, Investment Atlas 1 and 2. Investment Atlas 3 is out now. That one, Creating Wealth Using Historical Trends. Ken, look forward to our conversation tonight at 6 right here on 790 KABC. Thank you very much for taking the call here now.
My pleasure, Frank. Take care.
Thank you very much. And out to the freeways we go now, 790 KABC. Frank Mottek here. Did you know that for more than 10,000 years, gold has been the greatest store of value and considered a safe haven asset to preserve your wealth? Well, now with the U.S. debt at more than $36 trillion and climbing, a possible recession on the horizon, and the development of the digital dollar, central bank digital currency, it's more critical now than ever before to safeguard your assets, like your cash savings and retirement accounts, with physical gold. Opening a gold IRA is one of the best ways to secure your wealth and create a stable financial future. Stop worrying about your retirement in the market and cash savings in the bank. Feel confident, prepared, and in control with physical gold and silver. Give Joe Morgan a call at 1-800-753-8534. Mention Frank Mottek, and you could get $1,000 worth of silver with a qualifying purchase. Call 1-800-753-8534 or visit UnitedGoldGroup.com. All right, 790 KBC welcomes. Want to take a guess on this one? Pink Martini. That's the name of the group, Pink Martini, coming to the Greek Theater August 23rd. Tickets are on sale Friday at Ticketmaster.com. And right now, caller 9 wins at 1-888-795-2222. You can get a pair of tickets to the show if you're caller 9. Call now, 1-888-795-2222. Tickets furnished by Live Nation. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KBC. Mixed finish to the day on Wall Street. A mixed start to the new week. We see the Dow up 33 points today at 43,461. The S&P 500 turning negative, down 30 points at 5,983. That's the one that hit the record highs last week. The Nasdaq taking a tumble today, down 237 at 19,287. NVIDIA among the casualties of the day today, down more than $4 at 130 and change. But Apple in the plus column of $1.55 at 247.10. Shares of Alibaba, the so-called Amazon of China, moving down nearly $15 at 129 and change. Palantir down nearly $11 at $90.68. Supermicro computer shares down more than $4 at 51 and change. Nike among the winners today, up nearly 5%, and Walgreens shares moving higher by 6.5%. Gold moving higher. Right now hovering at around $2,965.90 an ounce. Silver at $32.63, and platinum at $974.60 an ounce. Tesla shares down more than $7 today at $3.30 and change. Among the egg names, Vital Farms down more than $2 at 32 and change, and Cal-Maine, another egg producer, moving lower by $1.70 at $89.34. Rough day for the cryptos here. We see the Bitcoin ETF BITO down to 21 and change. Bitcoin itself down about 2,200 here at the moment at 91,763. Ethereum down a dollar, make that 139 at 2,496. And Doge is back to 21 cents. And now the latest news on 790 KBC. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KBC. Tensions rising in the Middle East again, with Israel moving tanks into the West Bank over the weekend for the first time since 2002. And an Iranian general is making new threats against Israel. This as the effort continues to get all of the hostages taken by Hamas following the Hamas terror attack on Israel on October 7th, 2023. Joining us live now following all these developments closely is Middle East expert, author of numerous books, including his latest, Spies Against Armageddon, Inside Israel's Secret Wars, longtime network news correspondent, former network news colleague, Dan RAVIV joins us live here now. And Dan, first of all, congratulations on your new podcast, The Mossad Files, and I'll be looking forward to catching that as well. Dan RAVIV, thank you very much for joining us live here this afternoon.
What a pleasure, Frank. And as usual, when it comes to the Middle East, we have a lot to talk about.
Certainly. Give us your thoughts here about the latest developments.
Well, you know, the story you mentioned about a general in Iran's military threatening Israel with destruction, one Israeli cabinet minister said, okay, we're ready. That does not shake up the Israelis. Keep in mind that twice last year, in April and in October, for the first time, Iran launched ballistic missiles at Israel about 1,100 miles away. And along the way, Israel, and with help from the U.S. and France and Britain and even Jordan, they shot down almost every Iranian missile. And so the Israelis are feeling that Iran really is weakened right now. They lost their ally in Syria when the Assad regime was overthrown. Hezbollah in Lebanon is really an Iranian creation, and Hezbollah is weak, at least for now, seems to be defeated. So I don't think Israel's too worried about that. But as for the West Bank, there was concern that Hamas, having, in Israel's view, not done well in Gaza. Gaza is so destroyed that Hamas may be stepping up its activities in the West Bank, and that's why Israel's taking it super seriously, sending in tanks. There have been a lot of Palestinian casualties in recent months. Israel just decided to get tough. It's really hard to decide if they had another choice, or it's just the right-wing ministers in the Israeli government who insisted on this tough crackdown on Hamas activity in the West Bank.
And certainly over the last month, things have changed in Washington, and President Trump has been very supportive of Benjamin Netanyahu, held that joint news conference at the White House with him, and that's when he mentioned about redeveloping Gaza and so forth. Tell us about President Trump's support for Israel and how that has changed the equation there.
Oh, Frank, you're so right. It's made all the difference because the Israelis, frankly, for the past 4 years, were worried about what would Joe Biden think. Even after the October 7th massacres by Hamas, Israel hit back very hard in Gaza, but Joe Biden would sometimes withhold some weapons and tell the Israelis not to be too tough and that the Israelis had to send in a lot of humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza. Now, Trump is taking a much tougher stand and says basically that whatever Netanyahu decides is fine with him. But there's another element. Trump does have a Middle East envoy, a friend of his, a real estate businessman, Steve Witkoff. He is absolutely an official White House envoy. He's going to be in Jerusalem on Wednesday, day after tomorrow, meeting with Netanyahu, putting pressure on Netanyahu to try to end the Gaza war. Witkoff is also working on the Ukraine file, and he says that President Trump wants to end all wars. And so they're trying to figure out a plan where all the prisoners and all the hostages will be released, and maybe that Israel will pull back. But like I say, the Israelis are not in that kind of mood right now. We'll have to see how they react to that visit by Steve Witkoff.
What about the effort to get all of the hostages out of Hamas captivity, the ones that were taken following the terror attack on Israel back on October 7th, 2023, and all the heartbreaking news associated with all that?
Yeah, we're at a decision point right now. More than 24 hostages were released by Hamas, but as you know, there also were some dead bodies, including 2 little kids, the youngest hostages, 4 years old, 9 months old, and their mom. All were returned to Israel in coffins, dead. And even that was messed up. At first, they returned the body of an unknown woman and only later the mother. Israel says they were strangled by hand, and then the bodies were abused to try to make it look like they died in an Israeli airstrike. Israel is so angry about that, they thought of not even continuing with these exchanges because, you know, the Palestinians get hundreds of prisoners each time that Hamas releases just a few Israelis. So on Saturday night, the Israelis refused to hand over the latest 600 Palestinian prisoners. Hamas claims a violation. This is something also that Steve Witkoff is going to work on with the mediators of Egypt and Qatar. They're a little stuck right now, and frankly, if the hostage exchanges don't go ahead, then the ceasefire may not survive, and Gaza could erupt again.
And indeed, there's at least one American hostage still in the mix there, right?
Absolutely. The Americans say, the U.S. government says that there are 5 Americans who were kidnapped by Hamas on that awful October 7th. Only 1 is still alive. Obviously, the families want to get back, well, even the bodies for a decent burial. And this is one reason that it's of high concern to President Trump and to his envoy Witkoff. Again, however, the Israelis are in a very tough and angry mood. I don't know if that means they're going to demand a quicker hostage exchange in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, or decide to go back to war. We're kind of on the edge and watching what the Israelis especially will decide late this week.
On there live with Middle East expert Dan RAVIV, and something else you're watching very closely, what's happening in Syria, given that dramatic regime change there with Assad being overthrown there. What's developing there? I know Israel's also watching how things are coming together there.
And not just watching, Israel actually moved some troops to the north beyond Israel's border and the Golan Heights, which Israel captured from Syria back in 1967. Israel moved troops into Syrian territory, saying that Israel doesn't trust the new government in Syria. They are radicals, Islamic radicals associated with al-Qaeda. I mean, it's really great. I think everyone would agree that they overthrew the Assad regime. It was a terrible dictatorship, and the civil war in Syria killed tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people. Well, Israel doesn't trust the new government, so they crossed the border. They said it would be temporary. But just today, Frank, Israeli government ministers said for now, they're staying. You can imagine Arab countries are pointing the finger at Israel that it's trying to steal some land, occupy more territory. Again, the Israelis say it's temporary, but it's another cause of tension. And, of course, the neighboring country is Lebanon, where Israel has not fully pulled out despite the recent ceasefire there, claiming that Hezbollah has been violating the deal. I would say that's a lot of tension on a lot of fronts, Frank.
Certainly in a Middle East powder keg, and we've been following these developments for decades at Dan RAVIV, and usually when we have a situation like this, the price of oil tends to spike, but it's actually been coming down lately, down to around $70 a barrel here at last check, but the potential here for an increase is obviously tremendous given the tremendous tensions. What are your thoughts about how this might impact the price of oil ultimately, especially with maximum pressure being applied to Iran and so forth?
Yeah, I think we're finding that when it comes to Iran, even though the U.S. has stepped up the sanctions on Iran, saying that no one should buy oil from Iran, China still is. Iran is still pumping. When necessary to control the prices, Saudi Arabia and other countries in the Gulf, are controlling their output. So it is quite surprising in a time of very high tension. I'll tell you what we do see. We see the price of gold going up a lot, of course, in recent months. That seems to be the reaction to instability. When it comes to oil, there doesn't seem to be a shortage. And so despite the pressures in the Middle East, I think there's a high confidence that Israel is doing well militarily, that Saudi Arabia kind of quietly agrees with Israel and won't negate what Israel is doing. And that's a kind of optimism that the pro-Western countries may turn out okay. It may be messy along the way, but I don't think radical Iran is going to be the winner as this entire situation unfolds.
Dan RAVIV, thank you very much for that thorough analysis and for taking the call here this afternoon. That is Dan RAVIV, Middle East expert, author of numerous books, including his latest, Spies Against Armageddon, Inside Israel's Secret Wars. Also now co-host of a new podcast called The Mossad Files. Dan, thank you very much for joining us live here this afternoon.
Pleasure, Frank. Take care.
Thank you very much. And out to the freeways now, 790 KABC Los Angeles. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KABC. The massive rebuilding effort is underway here in Southern California following last month's firestorms. The area is ravaged. Pacific Palisades, Altadena, and the other areas hit by the fires last month. Thousands of homes and businesses were destroyed in a vast area larger than the area of Manhattan, which is absolutely mind-blowing. We're continuing to follow all of the efforts to rebuild Southern California. On the commercial real estate scene, there's elsewhere a big project in West Hollywood. Back to the drawing board there. Apparently it's not going to happen. What was to have been a gateway project on Santa Monica Boulevard at Melrose is not happening. It's just a big hole in the ground there, and looks like they're going to have to fill that hole. So we're watching what's happening there as well as throughout the commercial real estate landscape here in the Los Angeles area. Joining us live now, Jerry Sullivan at The Real Deal, the authoritative source on commercial real estate. Jerry, thank you very much for joining us live here this afternoon.
It's my pleasure, Frank. Good to talk to you.
Likewise. What strikes you, first of all, and what's happening on the effort to rebuild the fire-ravaged areas here?
Well, on the Los Angeles side, meaning, the Pacific Palisades, because Altadena is a matter for L.A. County, so separate from the city of L.A. But on the city of Los Angeles side, I think there's increasing concern about what seems to be a lack of grasp on the part of the city, and specifically Mayor Bass, who I think is really, raising questions about her ability to handle this.
And we have Steve Soboroff heading her effort, apparently for free now after turning down or after it was exposed that he was going to get $500,000 for 3 months of work. Apparently he's agreed to work for free now. We had Rick Caruso on this program on Friday with the Steadfast LA effort, which he's leading as well now. So all of these efforts are happening.
Yeah, and I think there's a question that's gone unasked about the Soberoff situation, and say whatever one might about the 500,000 and whether someone of that stature should even be taking that. There was a time in LA when there would be a raft of civic-minded executives who would take $1 a year for that job. But what no one's really, I think, gotten to is, did anyone really think this is a 90-day job? Because you're in it for a much longer stretch than that, and just the fact that someone is hiring what they call the czar, a rebuilding czar, for 90 days, I find that troublesome. But before you even get to the pay.
That's a very important point, and the timetable of all of this remains to be seen. We've heard about some sort of schedule, but I have not seen any schedule really of the rebuilding. It's obviously a tremendous recovery effort still happening right now. So, have you heard any reliable timetable at this point?
No, not at all. And by the way, the fire chief, I guess, was fired the other day without the promised investigation. If you recall, they essentially outsourced the general contractor's job on this rebuild, and I'm not even sure, how you set up a general contractor for a job like this. After what one councilman called, I guess the company came in and made a quote unquote a little pitch. So there's not a lot that's real impressive about the response so far.
All right.
And I think it's really. And talking to people, well-placed people in the marketplace, there's some real concerns that are growing.
And certainly in the commercial real estate world, this Melrose Triangle project in West Hollywood is getting a lot of attention. The project is dead. It's just a big hole in the ground there at the corner of Santa Monica Boulevard and Melrose near Doheny there, across from the Troubadour, that landmark nightclub there. What do we need to know about that?
Well, Frank, this one is a bit of a head-scratcher. The Real Deal reported more than 3 years ago, I believe, that the developer of that project, Armin Gabay, was convicted of a felony and sentenced to 4 years in prison for attempting to bribe, apparently, a Los Angeles County official. He was trying to fill the Hawthorne Mall, which he owned at the time, and was trying to get a big city agency to move in there, and apparently bribed or attempted to bribe a county official. So the developer was sentenced to prison 3 years ago. I don't know how the city of West Hollywood got caught short on this. I think it was pretty obvious there might be some problems.
Very interesting. We'll continue to follow that. It looks like there's an effort now to fill that hole, so we're going to be hearing more about that. What about MacArthur Park and what's happening in that area?
Well, Frank, I was just over in MacArthur Park and went to have lunch at Langer's and just kind of toured the area on foot, and this is a shame. That should be a beautiful public amenity, public resource, community resource. I don't know if you've been over there lately, Frank. Have you seen the cages they have on the sidewalks?
Yes, sir.
So apparently the best the city can do to try and keep bootleg merchants or people setting up card tables to sell shampoo and flea market type stuff. And then, of course, homeless people would be attracted there. And then, of course, people who prey on homeless or drug dealers or whatever, that's gone on in the area. And the best the city can do is put up these chain link cages that essentially block off the sidewalk and then get filled.
Yeah, it's really something there, Jerry, and thanks for spotlighting that. And I do get by there almost daily, and it's absolutely heartbreaking. Hope Mr. Langer hangs in there. Jerry Sullivan, National Managing Editor of The Real Deal, the commercial real estate site. Thank you very much for joining us live here. Mottek On Money, 790 KBC.
No one knows music like Rolling Stone. Senior writer Brian Hyatt talks the biggest music news from the biggest stars.
Almost everyone is teaming up on Drake. It's like Drake versus the world.
Yeah.
You first met Prince, you were driving for him before you were drumming for him.
That's correct.
Stevie Wonder! You kind of have to understand how Stevie began. White radio. That's where the money was. That's where it still is. You know what I'm saying?
Rolling Stone Music Now. Follow and listen on your favorite platform.